Welcome to Awakened Calm. The night has a way of inviting reflection, long after the world has quieted and the day's demands have dissolved into silence. Something subtle calls us inward, the sound of your own breathing, the rhythm of your heartbeat, even the thoughts that still linger at the edges of your awareness. They all become part of a deeper conversation you rarely have time to notice. Tonight, you are invited into that conversation, guided not by ordinary stories, but by wisdom that has traveled across centuries and continents to reach you exactly where you are. Imagine standing on the deck of a ship beneath a vast Pacific sky, or pausing on a dusty village road in ancient India. Picture the falling snow outside a mountain temple in China, or the reflection of the moon captured in a quiet Japanese well. These are not distant legends for scholars to study in forgotten books. They are living encounters, preserved because they speak to the same struggles and questions we carry now. How do we live with clarity in a noisy world? How do we discover balance between passion and calm? What does it mean to meet life's challenges without losing ourselves in the process? There is a simple truth hidden in these Zen tales. They do not arrive with the weight of heavy doctrine or complicated rules. They come disguised as ordinary moments. An elderly woman with a bundle of sticks, a monk listening to the sound of bamboo, a master drawing water from a humble well. Yet within these small details lies something extraordinary, like a key left in plain sight. These stories open doors to ways of seeing that transform not only how we rest tonight, but how we awaken tomorrow. What might change if your heart could burn with the fire of commitment while your eyes remained as calm as a still lake? That question lingers as a promise. It suggests that strength and serenity are not opposites we must choose between, but partners we can hold together. To hear these stories is not only to be lulled into peaceful rest, but also to carry a seed of clarity into waking life. As you settle into the comfort of your bed, let yourself drift into this shared journey. The wisdom of East and West meets here, not as a history lesson, but as a personal invitation. Each story is a lantern, gently lighting the path inward, reminding you that peace is not something to chase. It is already here, waiting to be recognized in the simplest of gestures and the quietest of moments. So let the night carry you, not into the restless chatter of thought, but into the still waters, where reflection becomes clear. Listen with openness, as if the stories were written for you alone. Their echoes have guided countless others before you, across oceans and generations, and tonight they may guide you as well, into rest, into peace, and into the kind of sleep where wisdom itself becomes your companion. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, a moving wilderness of waves beneath a sky that seemed too wide to belong to this world. On the deck of a steamship bound for America in 1893, a quiet figure stood near the railing, his robes catching the wind like muted banners. His name was Soyen Shaku, a Zen monk from Japan, and though he appeared calm, the journey he had undertaken was unlike any that had come before. The ship itself was alive with noise. American businessmen spoke loudly about opportunities in Asia, their cigars sending blue trails of smoke into the open air. Christian missionaries gathered in corners of the deck, rehearsing arguments they hoped would win over souls in foreign lands. There were scholars, journalists, and travelers of every kind, each with their own reasons for crossing this vast ocean. Amid this restless company, Soyen stood in stillness. His eyes moved from the restless sea to the sky, then inward to a silence that no wave could disturb. It was not his first encounter with the West. Japan itself had only recently stepped into the modern age, opening ports and absorbing technology at a speed that astonished the world. Yet the spiritual essence of his country, the wisdom carried by Zen, had remained largely unseen beyond its shores. That was about to change. Soyen Shaku had been invited to Chicago to speak at the world's Parliament of Religions, an unprecedented gathering of leaders from every major faith. It would be the first time Zen Buddhism was presented to the Western world in such a public way. For Soyen, the task was both an honor and a profound test. The sea voyage stretched for weeks. Each morning, before the bustle of the day began, he woke before dawn and followed his own discipline, He ate a simple meal, no more than what the body required. He walked the deck slowly, treating each step as a meditation, as though the groaning of the ship and the crash of the waves were themselves chants from the sutras. Then he sat in silence, spine straight, gaze lowered, while the rest of the ship stirred around him. Passengers often looked at him curiously. Some thought him eccentric, others respected his dignity. A few even dared to ask what it was he sought in that stillness. His answer was never complicated. Life, he explained, is shaped by the discipline we choose each day. If the body is neglected, the mind becomes restless. If desires are indulged without limit, the spirit becomes heavy. To live simply is not to deny joy, but to protect it. He carried with him a small journal in which he had written a handful of principles, guidelines, he believed anyone could follow, regardless of culture or creed. Among them were clear instructions: rise early, eat modestly, work diligently, allow time for silence, and honor both body and mind with respect. But on this journey, he added something new. One morning, while the horizon glowed with the first light of dawn, he wrote a fresh line in his notebook. Each day, lift your eyes to the open sky and remember that your worries are no more than drifting clouds. This was not a teaching he had inherited from ancient masters. It was born of the sea itself, of the endless horizon that taught him how small yet how free the human spirit could feel when seen against such immensity. By the time the ship reached San Francisco, the monk had become a figure of quiet fascination among the passengers. Some businessmen admitted that his calm presence had softened their own tempers during the long weeks at sea. A missionary confessed that while he had set out to convert the world, he now realized there was something to learn from this Eastern silence. Even those who had mocked him at first found themselves watching the horizon in the mornings, recalling his words about clouds and worries. Without seeking it, Soyen had already begun his teaching. The journey across the continent was another revelation. Trains carried him through the raw landscapes of America, towering mountains, endless plains, rivers that carved their way through gorges as deep as memory. He noticed the energy of this young nation, its hunger for progress, its confidence that the future could be built by human hands alone. Yet he also sensed the unease beneath it all, a kind of restlessness that no invention could soothe. The people were bold, but many were also burdened by an invisible weight, always striving, rarely still. Chicago greeted him with the noise of industry and the excitement of an event unlike any other. The world's parliament of religions gathered representatives from Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and many other traditions. For weeks, crowds filled the great hall to hear voices from every corner of the globe. Soyen stood quietly in the wings, waiting for his turn. When it came, he did not thunder with authority, nor appeal with promises of salvation. He spoke softly, in measured phrases, translated for the audience by his students. He told them that Zen was not about belief, but about practice. It was not a matter of doctrine, but of direct experience. To see clearly, he said, is to let go of clinging. To live wisely is to treat each moment as sufficient. He shared the principles he carried in his notebook, those simple disciplines that shaped his days on the ship. He spoke of silence not as emptiness but as fullness, a ground from which clarity could grow, and he reminded them of the vast sky, where clouds may gather but never linger. The audience, accustomed to sermons filled with arguments and promises, was struck by the simplicity. Here was no call to conversion, no demand for loyalty. There was only an invitation to look directly at life and to see it as it was. Some dismissed him as too quiet, too plain, but others felt something stir. They had never been told that peace was already within them, waiting to be recognized in the simplest acts of daily life. Among those who listened was a young American scholar who would later write that Soyen Shaku had changed the course of his life. He described the moment not as a dramatic revelation, but as a subtle shift, like the quiet turning of a key in a lock. Suddenly the door to another way of living had opened, and he could not return to ignorance. For Soyen, the parliament was only the beginning. He would return to Japan with the knowledge that Zen had taken root in foreign soil, Years later, he would send one of his students, De Suzuki, to continue this work, translating Zen texts and bringing their wisdom to generations of readers in the West. The ripple that began on a steamship in 1893 would spread through universities, monasteries, and even into modern psychology. But perhaps the most enduring lesson of Soyen's journey was not his speeches nor his writings. It was the image of a monk standing quietly at the railing of a ship, watching the clouds drift across a boundless sky. It was the discipline of one man who lived his principles so simply that others could not help but notice. It was the reminder that the deepest truths do not shout, they whisper, and it is up to us to listen. Even now, more than a century later, his example carries meaning. In a world that rushes faster than ever, where technology promises connection, but often delivers distraction, the sight of a man finding peace in silence feels more radical than any invention. His principle about the sky and the clouds is still relevant. When burdens gather, when worries darken the horizon, we can pause, look upward, and remember that they too are passing forms. The sky remains untouched, vast and patient. For those listening tonight, perhaps this is the first lesson to carry into rest. You do not need to solve every problem before closing your eyes. You do not need to carry the weight of tomorrow into your dream, like Soyen Shaku gazing at the Pacific dawn. You can allow the worries of the day to drift like clouds across the sky of your mind. The sky itself, your awareness, is never burdened. It is wide enough to hold every storm and bright enough to shine again when the clouds dissolve. The journey of a Zen master to the West may seem far removed from your own life, yet its wisdom is as close as your next breath. Tonight, as you prepare to let sleep take you, imagine yourself on that deck. Feel the cool wind, hear the crash of waves, see the endless horizon. Let the vastness remind you that what troubles you is small beside the ocean of awareness. And know, as Soyen Shaku knew, that peace is not somewhere else. It is here, waiting for you to notice. The scene shifts far from the steamships and cities of the modern world, back into the dusty roads of ancient India. The sun burned high above, casting long shadows across the countryside. In a small village near the Ganges, people gathered to hear the Buddha speak. His reputation had traveled far beyond the borders of kingdoms. Farmers, merchants, monks, and wanderers came not because they were compelled by law or tradition, but because they were drawn to the quiet strength of a man who seemed to understand the heart more clearly than anyone alive. Among the crowd that day was an elderly woman. Her back was bent from years of labor, her hands rough from gathering wood and tending fires. Beside her walked a young boy, her grandson, whose curious eyes scanned the throng with both excitement and hesitation. They had heard that the Buddha would pass through their village, and though most came to receive blessings, the woman came with questions. She carried on her back a bundle of sticks tied with frayed rope. The load was heavy, yet she walked with a determination that made younger men step aside. Some whispered about her, why burden herself with firewood when coming to hear a teacher speak? But those who knew her understood that the bundle was no accident. She was known for her sharp tongue and her unwillingness to accept easy answers. To her, life was a constant test, and wisdom should not come without struggle. When she reached the clearing where the Buddha sat beneath a broad tree, the crowd fell silent. His presence was neither commanding nor dramatic, yet it carried weight. He looked at the people with eyes that seemed to see through every pretense. His disciple sat nearby, ready to interpret his words, but often his silence itself was the greatest teaching. The woman stepped forward. She did not bow, as others did. Instead, she placed her bundle of sticks on the ground with a thud and stood with arms folded. The boy clung to her side, unsure whether to be afraid or proud. "Teacher," she said, her voice firm though touched with age, "I have heard that you speak of compassion, of patience, of not clinging to anger. But tell me this, what do you do when someone offers you an insult you do not deserve? What do you do when another throws cruelty into your face as if it were a gift? Do you simply accept it?" The crowd stirred. Some frowned at her boldness. Others waited eagerly for the reply. The Buddha remained quiet for a moment, his gaze steady. Then he smiled, not mockingly but with a kindness that seemed to soften even the hard lines of the woman's face. "If a man brings you a gift," he asked gently, "and you choose not to receive it, to whom does it belong?" The woman frowned, puzzled. "Why? It remains with the giver." "Then," said the Buddha, "if someone offers you harsh words, and you do not take them into your heart, who must carry them?" The crowd murmured in recognition of the wisdom hidden in this simple question. But the woman was not satisfied. She pointed to her bundle of sticks, her voice rising. "Easy words, teacher, but truth is not always so simple. I have carried this wood through the heat of day. If I drop it here, does it cease to be heavy? No, the burden remains, even if I pretend to walk away. Anger and insult are not so easily dismissed. They cling to us like smoke from fire. Tell me then, if your teaching is true, how do I lay down what burns within me?" This was no ordinary challenge. She was not testing for entertainment. She was speaking for every person who had ever been wounded by words, who had ever tried to release anger, only to find it rising again like embers that refused to die. The boy at her side watched wide-eyed, sensing that something important was unfolding before him. The Buddha reached out and touched the bundle of sticks. His hand was gentle, yet it seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "These sticks are real," he said softly. "They press upon your back because you choose to carry them. They are heavy, yes, but you have tied them with rope and taken them upon yourself. If you untie the rope, the sticks fall. The earth will hold them. They no longer belong to you." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the listeners. Anger is the same. It feels heavy because we claim it as our own. We tie it to ourselves with ropes of memory and judgment. But when we see clearly that an insult belongs not to us but to the one who throws it, the rope loosens. The burden falls. The woman looked at him, her expression still fierce but uncertain. She glanced at her grandson, who was staring at the bundle, as if seeing it for the first time. Slowly, she reached down and tugged at the frayed rope. The sticks shifted, then tumbled onto the ground. Dust rose in the air, and the boy coughed. The crowd leaned forward, watching as though something sacred had taken place. The woman straightened her back. For the first time in years, she felt a strange lightness. Her body was still aged, her muscles still worn, yet something inside her seemed to expand. She studied the sticks lying harmlessly on the earth. They were the same pieces of wood as before, yet without her shoulders beneath them, they no longer had power. The Buddha spoke again, this time with greater depth. "Do not mistake this for ignoring truth. The truth does not vanish because you refuse an insult. The truth stands whether you accept it or deny it. What vanishes is only the lie that you must carry what is not yours. The sun does not stop shining because clouds pass before it. The river does not cease to flow because someone throws stones at its surface. In the same way, your heart need not be bound by another's anger." The boy whispered to his grandmother, "Does that mean the truth takes care of itself?" The Buddha nodded. "Yes, truth exists whether or not we guard it. It is like the sky, vast and unchanging. Insults and judgments are like birds flying across it. They do not stain the sky. They pass, and the sky remains." Tears welled in the woman's eyes, though she quickly wiped them away. She had lived long enough to know hardship, betrayal, and loss. She had carried not just wood but grief, resentment, and disappointments. For years she had believed these burdens defined her. Yet in that moment, she realized that she had been the one tying them to her own back. The boy bent down to pick up a stick, but she stopped him with a gentle hand. "Leave them," she whispered. "The earth can carry them better than I." The people in the clearing were silent. They had witnessed not just an exchange of words, but a transformation. The lesson was not abstract philosophy. It was lived truth, shown in the simple act of a woman laying down her burden. Later, when the crowd dispersed, the woman walked home with her grandson. The road was the same dusty path, the sun, the same relentless fire overhead. Yet each step felt lighter. The boy skipped beside her, asking question after question. She answered as best she could, but her thoughts returned again and again to the fallen bundle of sticks. She realized that in all her years, she had never felt so free. That night, as they sat by the fire, the boy asked her what she had learned. She took a long time before answering. Finally, she said, "I learned that truth is not something we need to hold. It holds itself. What weighs us down are the things we choose to claim, even when they were never ours. I have carried anger like firewood, thinking it would warm me, but it only burned my back. Now I see that letting go does not mean losing strength. It means finding it." The boy nodded solemnly, though his young mind could only grasp pieces of the meaning. Still, the image of his grandmother dropping the bundle would remain with him for life. He would tell the story to his children and they to theirs. And so the lesson traveled, not only in sacred texts or sermons, but in the memory of ordinary people. It was not a teaching reserved for monks or scholars. It belonged to farmers, to children, to weary old women carrying sticks along village roads. It belonged to anyone who had ever felt the sting of insult, the heat of anger, the heaviness of resentment. The story of the woman and the Buddha became a lantern passed from hand to hand. It reminded people that freedom is not found by changing the world around us, but by changing the way we carry what the world gives. We cannot stop others from speaking cruelty, but we can choose not to bind their words to our own hearts. We can leave the bundle on the ground and walk on lighter, freer, and truer. Even now, centuries later, the lesson speaks. In offices and homes, in cities and quiet neighborhoods across the modern world, people still face insults and judgments. They still feel the weight of words that were never meant to be theirs. And they still have the chance, at any moment, to untie the rope and let the bundle fall. That is the gift the Buddha offered the woman that day. Not an escape from life, not a denial of truth, but a way of living in which burdens no longer define us. She came with firewood, but she left with freedom. And perhaps that is the heaviest burden any of us can lay down, the belief that we must carry what does not belong to us. The roads of India and the villages by the Ganges fade, and the story carries us further east, into the mountains of China, where winter lays its silent hand across the land. The air is sharp with cold, the ground covered in snow that glitters faintly under a pale moon. Here, long ago, lived a monk named Kyogen, a man tormented by questions that would not leave him. From his youth, Kyogen had been drawn to the path of practice. He studied the sutras, memorized verses, sat for long hours in meditation, and obeyed the strict codes of his monastery. His teachers praised his diligence, other monks respected his devotion, and yet, inside, he was restless. The question that gnawed at him was simple in phrasing yet endless in depth. What is my original face? This was not a question about mirrors or features. In Zen tradition, the original face points to the true self, the essence that exists before thought, before memory, before even the moment of birth. It is a riddle that cannot be answered by intellect alone. The more Kyogen pondered it, the more it escaped him, slipping from his grasp like water through fingers. He threw himself into practice with even greater intensity. At dawn, he chanted until his voice grew hoarse. At night, he sat so long in meditation that his legs trembled with pain. He fasted, he prayed, he walked in the forests reciting verses aloud. Still, the question burned. What is my original face? Why could he not see what the master spoke of with such clarity? As winter deepened, his struggle grew unbearable. Each snowflake that fell seemed to mock him with its silence. Each gust of mountain wind whispered an answer he could not hear. His fellow monks told him to be patient, to trust the path, but patience had turned to frustration. He felt like a man pounding on a locked door that would never open. One night, unable to sleep, he wrapped his robe tightly and stepped outside into the snow. The courtyard was silent, the trees bending under their white burden. He began to walk in slow circles, each step leaving a dark imprint in the pale ground. His breath clouded before him. He whispered the question over and over. What is my original face? What is it? He walked until a pattern of footprints marked the snow like a wheel. The circle became a symbol of his endless search, going round and round, wearing paths into the earth but never finding a way forward. Exhaustion overcame him, and he stopped beneath a grove of bamboo at the edge of the monastery grounds. The stalks rose tall and straight, their leaves trembling faintly in the night wind. Kyogen leaned against one, his body shivering with fatigue. In his mind, the question screamed louder than ever. Why am I blind to the truth? Why is the path closed to me? If there is no answer, why torment me with the riddle at all? Then, as he shifted his weight, the frozen snow slipped from a branch and fell heavily onto one of the bamboo stalks. The stalk bent under the weight, then snapped back upright with a sudden crack that echoed through the night. The sound was sharp, pure, ringing like a bell struck in the silence. In that instant, something broke open in Kyogen's heart. The question that had tormented him dissolved, not because he found an answer, but because he saw that the answer was never hidden. His original face was not somewhere else, waiting to be discovered. It was here, in the sound of bamboo, in the falling snow, in the awareness that heard both. It was in every breath he had ever taken, in every moment he had ever lived. It had always been with him, yet his grasping had blinded him. He stood still, stunned. The cold no longer bit at him. The snow no longer seemed cruel. His footprints, circling endlessly in the courtyard, no longer appeared as failure, but as part of the dance of seeking that had led him here. He began to laugh, softly at first, then, with the release of years of burden. The next morning, the other monks noticed something different about him. His face, once tight with strain, now carried a softness. His eyes, once clouded with frustration, shone with quiet clarity. When they asked what had happened, he simply pointed toward the bamboo grove and said, "Listen." Some were puzzled, others shook their heads, but a few who stood in silence heard it, the subtle creak of bamboo swaying in the wind, the occasional crack as snow shifted from branch to branch. In those simple sounds, there was a teaching deeper than words. Kyogen did not claim enlightenment as a badge to display. He did not write long treatises or boast of visions. He continued his life of practice, sweeping floors, carrying water, meditating at dawn. Yet everything had changed. Where once he strained to find meaning, now he allowed meaning to reveal itself. Where once he fought to control thought, now he let thoughts drift like clouds across a winter sky. The bamboo had taught him what no scripture could. The truth cannot be forced. It arrives in its own time, like snow falling from a branch, sudden and undeniable. Years later, disciples would ask him about that night. They wanted formulas, instructions, clear paths they could follow to reproduce his awakening. But Kyogen would only smile and say, "Do not chase the bamboo crack. Sit in your own snow. Listen to your own silence, and let the sound come when it will." The story of Kyogen traveled far, told and retold in monasteries, villages, and eventually across oceans. For some, it became a lesson in patience. For others, a symbol of how awakening often comes, not through grand visions but through the most ordinary events. A sound, a moment, a sudden shift of perspective that is enough to dissolve years of struggle. What makes his story timeless is not the miracle of snow or bamboo, but the reminder that our deepest questions often cannot be solved by effort alone. They are not puzzles waiting for the clever to outwit them. They are doors that open only when we stop pounding on them and simply stand still long enough to see that there was never a wall at all. For those of us far removed from mountain temples and bamboo groves, the lesson remains. We too circle endlessly, our minds walking the same loops of worry, ambition, doubt, and regret. We too demand answers, believing peace will arrive only once the riddle is solved. But like Kyogen, we may discover that peace is already here, waiting in the simplest sound, the smallest pause. It may come in the clink of dishes in a quiet kitchen, in the hum of traffic outside a window, in the rustle of leaves stirred by evening air. It may come in the moment we finally stop demanding and simply listen. The original face we search for does not live in books or theories. It lives in the awareness that hears these sounds, sees these sights, feels this life as it is. When Kyogen laughed that night in the snow, he was not laughing at the difficulty of the question. He was laughing at the absurdity of seeking what was never lost, and that laughter is still echoing, carried across centuries. A reminder that awakening is less about finding something new than about recognizing what has always been present. So as you listen now, perhaps lying in bed, perhaps letting your mind drift towards sleep, take a moment to imagine the bamboo grove. Hear the crack of snow falling, sudden and clear. Let that sound remind you that the deepest truths often arrive without warning, in moments you might otherwise overlook. You do not need to force them. You do not need to exhaust yourself in endless circle. All that is required is to be present, to listen, and to let the sound come when it will. And when it does, may it bring the same release that came to Kyogen, the release of a burden carried too long, the freedom of knowing that you already are what you seek. The mountains of China fade, and the sound of bamboo in the snow gives way to another time, another place. Now the setting is Japan. In the age when samurai still ruled with their swords and merchants grew wealthy from the flow of silk and rice. In this world lived Ikkyu, a Zen monk unlike most others. His robes were often worn, his manner unpolished, and his words sharp with humor that could cut through pride like a blade. He was loved by some, misunderstood by many, but always true to the spirit of Zen, which thrives in simplicity. One evening, Ikkyu received an invitation from a powerful samurai. This man had grown wealthy not only from war but from trade and politics. His home was said to be larger than the local temple, adorned with lacquered screens, golden ornaments, and gardens designed to impress. He wanted Ikkyu present at a banquet, perhaps to display his generosity, perhaps to test the monk's character before his many guests. Ikkyu accepted the invitation, though not with excitement. He had no interest in fine foods or elaborate halls, yet he sensed there was something to be revealed in the event, a teaching hidden beneath the surface. He arrived, dressed as he always did, robes plain and frayed, his sandals carrying dust from the road. The servants who greeted him frowned at his appearance, whispering among themselves that such a man could not belong at a banquet of nobility. Inside, the hall gleamed with excess. Long tables overflowed with delicacies, fish cooked in rare spices, rice gleaming like pearls, fruits brought from distant provinces. Musicians played flutes and drums, their notes weaving through the chatter of guests dressed in silk and brocade. At the center sat the samurai host, his armor set aside, but his presence commanding all the same. When Ikkyu entered, the room grew curious. Many expected him to bow deeply, to offer blessings in exchange for hospitality. Instead, he walked calmly to the center, greeted the host with a nod, and sat quietly on the wooden floor rather than on the cushions provided. His eyes moved slowly around the hall, taking in the luxury without either admiration or disdain. The host smiled broadly, eager to show his guests the breadth of his power. "Welcome, Master Ikkyu. Tonight you dine as a king. Taste the finest food. Drink the richest sake. Tell us, what does a monk make of such abundance?" Ikkyu accepted a small bowl of rice from a servant. He lifted it gently, examined the grains, and ate with the same calmness, as if he was sitting by a roadside fire. When he had finished, he looked at the samurai and said, "Abundance and poverty are but reflections in the same well. What matters is not what fills the bowl, but how the heart drinks from it." Some guests laughed, others frowned, unsure whether he praised or criticized. The samurai waved his hand for silence, curious where the monk's words would lead. After the meal, as the moon rose high and bright, Ikkyu asked to be taken to the garden. The guests followed, intrigued. In the center stood a stone well filled with clear water, its surface smooth as glass beneath the moonlight. Ikkyu leaned over the edge and beckoned the others to look. "Tell me," he asked, "what do you see?" They peered into the well. At first they saw only the reflection of the moon, perfect and radiant, floating in the dark water. But as they leaned closer, they notice something else, their own faces, wavering and distorted by the movement of water. The golden sleeves of their robes shimmered oddly, their proud features bent into strange shapes. "This," Ikkyu said, "is the banquet you have truly attended. You drink and you feast, yet what you see is only reflection. The moon above remains whole, untouched by the water, yet in this well, it appears broken whenever the surface is disturbed. So too does your heart. When stirred by desire or pride, the reflection becomes twisted, but the truth, like the moon, is untouched." The garden fell silent. Some shifted uncomfortably, others gazed deeper into the well. The samurai crossed his arms, his face unreadable. Finally, he asked, "And what then is the way to keep the reflection pure?" Ikkyu straightened and pointed not to the water, but to the night sky. "Stop staring only into the well. Lift your eyes. See the moon where it truly rests, free from distortion. The truth is not hidden in luxury or poverty. It shines above both, clear and whole. When you cling to reflections, you live in shadows. When you lift your gaze, you return to clarity." The words cut through the air with the simplicity of a blade. Some guests lowered their eyes, ashamed. Others felt a stirring of recognition. The boy who tended lanterns in the garden whispered to himself, as though discovering something precious. The moon was never in the water. The samurai remained still. For a long moment he looked at the well, then at the sky. At last he bowed his head. "You have humbled me, Master. I wished to show the greatness of my house, but you have shown me the poverty of my sight." Ikkyu did not gloat. He only smiled faintly and said, "Even the wealthiest house is poor if its master cannot see the moon above his roof. But even the poorest hut is rich if its dweller knows how to look up." The banquet ended not in triumph, but in silence. Guests left carrying more than full stomachs. They carried an unease, a recognition that the luxuries they clung to were reflections that bent and broke with every ripple of desire. Years passed, and the story of Ikkyu and the moon in the well spread through villages and temples. Farmers told it to their children, merchants whispered it to apprentices, monks repeated it to novices who struggled with attachment. For each listener, the story became a mirror. Some laughed, some resisted, some wept, but all remembered the image of the moon above and its fractured twin below. The power of the story lay in its simplicity. No grand miracle occurred, no supernatural display, only the sight of water reflecting the sky, a sight available to anyone, anywhere. Yet in that sight was hidden a truth. What we seek in distorted reflections has always been shining above, unbroken. For modern ears, far removed from samurai halls and stone wells, the lesson is still urgent. We too live surrounded by banquets of distraction screens glowing, possessions multiplying, voices clamoring for attention. We peer into the well of appearances, believing the distorted reflections to be real. We chase approval, success, wealth, only to find the images shifting, never stable, never satisfying. Ikkyu's teaching invites us to pause, to step back from the water's edge, to lift our eyes. The real moon is not in the well of opinions, not in the surface ripples of ambition. It is above us, steady, untouched. In the modern world, that moon might be the quiet of our own breath, the presence that watches thoughts rise and fall without claiming them. In the stillness of night, when distractions fade, we may glimpse it as clearly as Ikkyu did. And in that glimpse, we understand that peace is not something earned through possessions or lost through poverty. It is not dependent on reflection. It is the light that shines regardless, waiting only to be seen. That evening in the samurai's garden, Ikkyu offered no complicated doctrine. He gave no rules to follow, no scriptures to memorize. He only pointed to the moon. The rest was for each person to see for themselves. And that, perhaps, is why the story endures. Because no matter who we are or where we live, the moon still rises, the well still reflects, and the choice remains the same. Do we chase distorted reflections, or do we lift our eyes to what is whole? The moon above the well slowly fades from view, and the scene drifts again through time and place. From the samurai's banquet and Ikkyu's teaching, we travel to a quiet valley where a stream winds through the hills, feeding rice paddies and nourishing groves of bamboo. Here, in a modest temple tucked away among cedar trees, lived a young woman named Shiono. She was not born into wealth or noble blood. Her family were simple villagers who had long served the temple with small offerings of food and labor. From childhood, she had watched the monks in their quiet robes moving with deliberate grace, speaking with calm voices, bowing before the Buddha. Something in her heart longed for that same peace. Yet in her society, women were often told they could not reach such heights of practice, that enlightenment was reserved for men who studied sutras and meditated in the great halls. But Chiono refused to believe that truth could belong to only one half of humanity. She came to the temple each day, sweeping floors, carrying water, and listening from the edges of the chanting hall. Her presence was humble, but her devotion was clear. Over time, the abbot noticed her persistence. Though some resisted, he allowed her to stay as a lay disciple, performing tasks of service while quietly nurturing her own practice. Her work was simple yet constant. Each morning, before dawn, she would walk to the stream with a wooden bucket to fetch water for the temple. The bucket was old, patched many times, its bottom reinforced with wooden slats and iron nails. She balanced it carefully on her hip as she climbed the path back. At first she saw this task as labor, a duty she must perform before being allowed to study. But gradually, she began to sense something deeper. Each step, each breath, each drop of water became a part of her training. Carrying water was not separate from practice. It was practice itself. Still, Chiono longed for awakening. She read the sutras when she could. Though the characters were difficult, she sat in meditation long after her chores were done, her body aching yet her spirit unwilling to rest. She sought out teachers who spoke of emptiness, of the illusory nature of self. She repeated their words silently, trying to turn them into understanding, yet like Kyogen circling in the snow, she felt only frustration. The truth seemed always just out of reach. Season passed. She grew older, though her resolve never weakened. Then one autumn evening, as the wind rustled dry leaves along the ground, something happened that would change her life. Chiono had gone to the stream as usual, dipping her bucket into the cold water until it brimmed. The moon was rising above the hills, casting its silver reflection upon the surface. As she began her walk back, she glanced into the bucket and saw the moon floating there, perfect and round. She smiled, charmed by the beauty of carrying the heavens in her hands. Step by step she climbed, her eyes drawn again and again to the fragile light within the water. But halfway up the path, the rope that bound the bucket's base finally gave way. With a sudden crack, the bottom broke open. The water gushed out, spilling across the stones. The reflection of the moon shattered into countless fragments, then vanished entirely. Chiono stopped, staring at the empty frame of wood in her hands. At first, dismay rose in her chest. The bucket she had used for years was ruined. The water for the temple was lost. She would have to return in shame and explain her failure. But then, as the last drops slipped away, something struck her with a force beyond words. The moon had never been in the bucket. All along, she had believed she was carrying the moon's reflection, guarding it carefully, marveling at its fragile presence. Yet the real moon was untouched, shining freely above her. No crack in wood, no spill of water could alter its light. The reflection was an illusion, beautiful but fleeting. The true radiance had always been there, beyond her grasp, beyond her need to hold it. In that instant, something in Chiono dissolved. The years of striving, the ache of trying to prove her worth, the endless grasping at words and concepts all broke apart like the bucket's bottom. She laughed, a sound that startled the birds in the trees. She laughed until tears filled her eyes, not from sorrow but from release. She understood that enlightenment was not something to be carried, not something to possess or preserve like water in a bucket. It was as simple and as vast as the moon shining overhead. It was present in every moment she had lived. From sweeping floors to carrying water, she had not failed. She had been walking in the light all along. When she returned to the temple, carrying the broken bucket in her hands, the monks looked at her with surprise. She bowed before the abbot and said, "The bottom has fallen out of my bucket. Nothing is left inside. Yet now, the moon follows me wherever I go." The abbot's eyes widened. He recognized in her words the mark of true realization. From that day forward, Chiono was no longer seen as a servant at the margins of the temple. She was honored as a teacher in her own right, a living example that the path of awakening knows no boundaries of gender or station. Her story spread quickly, carried from temple to temple, from village to village. Women heard it and felt a stirring of hope. Men heard it and felt humility. Children heard it and learned that the simplest tasks can hold the greatest wisdom. The broken bucket became a symbol, not of loss, but of freedom. For generations, artists painted images of Chiono with her bucket, moonlight shining above. Poets wrote verses about the moment water spilled and truth poured in. Monks told her story to novices, reminding them that enlightenment cannot be grasped by force, but comes when the bottom falls out of our illusions. What makes Chiono's story timeless is not just the drama of the broken bucket, but the universality of its message. All of us carry reflections we mistake for the real moon. We chase approval, thinking it will make us whole. We grasp at possessions, believing they will secure our happiness. We cling to identities, fearing that without them we are nothing. Yet these are only reflections in water. They shimmer for a time, then vanish when the bucket breaks. The true light has never depended on them. Modern life offers endless buckets. Screens glow with images we try to capture. Careers demand our devotion as if they could hold permanence. Relationships, possessions, even our own bodies, we treat them as vessels to hold what cannot be held. Inevitably, cracks appear. Inevitably, the bottom falls out. And in that moment, we face the same realization as Chiono. The reflection was never the source. The moon was never in the bucket. If we resist, we feel despair. We mourn the loss, clinging desperately to shards of wood and drops of water. But if we look up, as Chiono did, we see the truth shining above, untouched by our loss. We realize that the light we sought has always been free, beyond grasping, beyond spilling. That recognition is liberation. Imagine Chiono walking home that night, the broken bucket swinging lightly at her side. No longer a burden, it had become a teacher. Each creak of its wood reminded her that nothing needs to be perfect to reflect truth. Each empty space reminded her that fullness lies not in holding but in being. For the rest of her life, she continued her tasks with the same devotion as before. She swept floors, carried water, taught those who asked, but now her eyes shone with a quiet joy. She no longer sought enlightenment as a distant prize. She lived it in every gesture, every breath. The moon followed her, not as reflection but as presence. Her legacy endures not in temples of stone but in the lives of those who remember her story. In Japan and beyond, her tale is told to remind us that awakening is not about acquiring more, but about losing what was never real. The crack in the bucket is the crack in our illusions. The water spilling away is the false self dissolving. The moon above is our true nature, steady and luminous. For those listening now, perhaps lying in darkness before sleep, let this image linger. Picture the wooden bucket, old and worn, breaking open on a quiet path. Feel the water slipping away, the reflection vanishing, and then lift your eyes to the night sky. There is the moon, whole and free, needing no vessel. That moon is you, the part of you untouched by fear, untouched by loss, untouched by time. When the bottom falls out, when what you cling to shatters, do not despair. Remember Chiono. Remember that the truth was never in the bucket. It has always been shining above, waiting for you to look up. After the image of Chiono walking under the moon with her broken bucket, the current of time flows forward again. Temples rise and fall. Dynasties shift. But the stream of practice continues. Our last story leads us to a monk named Zuigan, a man remembered not for lofty sermons or dramatic miracles, but for a strange, quiet ritual he performed each day. Zuigan lived in a temple near the coast. The air there carried the scent of salt, and gulls circled overhead. His days were simple, rising before dawn, sweeping the courtyard, teaching novices, meditating in the hall. Yet every morning, before he spoke to anyone else, he carried out a conversation with himself. He would stand in his small room, sometimes with a mirror before him, sometimes with nothing but empty air, and he would call out as though addressing another person. "Master," he would say aloud. "Yes," came his own reply. "Be awake. Yes, do not be deceived by others. No, do not deceive yourself. No." At first glance, it seems strange, even comical. Some novices giggled when they overheard him. Others shook their heads, thinking him eccentric. But over time, they realized that what appeared like madness carried the deepest sanity. Zuigan's ritual was not play acting, it was practice. Why did he speak to himself? Because he knew the greatest danger did not lie outside the temple walls but within the mind itself. He understood that the voices of doubt, pride, fear, and desire arise quietly, pretending to be the voice of truth. If left unchecked, they lead us astray. And so, each morning, he called forth his true awareness and answered it, reminding himself that the master he sought was not somewhere else but within. Imagine him standing there in the grey light of dawn, the faint cry of seabirds in the distance, his breath steady in the cool air. His words were simple, but behind them was a determination as sharp as a blade. He was speaking past the shifting clouds of thought, past the habits of ego, directly to the awareness that watches it all. In that dialogue, he found his anchor. Students began to notice something remarkable. Zuigan was unshakable. When conflicts arose in the temple, he listened calmly. When storms battered the coast and tore at the roof, he continued his work without panic. When praised, he bowed with humility. When criticized, he bowed the same. It seemed that nothing could deceive him, because he had already faced the deceiver within. The ritual grew in fame. Travelers who came to study under Zuigan would sometimes try to imitate him, repeating words in the mirror, but they soon discovered that parroting phrases without depth led nowhere. The power of his practice was not in the words themselves, but in the honesty behind them. He did not speak to perform, he spoke because he needed the reminder every single day. He explained once to a student who asked, "Why speak aloud when you could just think it?" Zuigan answered, "Because thoughts are slippery. They disguise themselves as truth. But when I speak aloud, I strip them bare. I can hear the difference between honesty and illusion. My voice makes the invisible visible." In this way, Zuigan revealed that practice is not about chasing rare experiences, but about daily vigilance. Enlightenment is not a finish line one reaches and then forgets. It is a living reality that must be refreshed each morning. Like sweeping the floor or drawing water, dust returns every day, illusion returns every day, and so we must clean every day. There is a story that once a young monk challenged him. "Master," he said, "if you are already awake, why remind yourself? Is that not unnecessary?" Zuigan smiled. "When the fire burns brightly, do we stop adding wood? When the sea is calm, do we stop watching the tide? Wakefulness is not an achievement to display. It is a flame that must be tended, a sea that must be respected. Even now, I may be deceived if I forget." The monk bowed, humbled. He realized that the master's ritual was not weakness but strength, a declaration that awareness is never finished, always living. Years later, when Zuigan grew old, his students continued to hear him every morning. His voice was softer now, his body frail, but the words remained steady. "Master, yes. Be awake, yes." The dialogue had become the rhythm of his life, as essential as breath. And when he finally passed, those who loved him said they could still hear his morning call echoing in their hearts, reminding them to be awake, to not be deceived, to not deceive themselves. What makes this story precious is not its strangeness but its familiarity. We too live with voices in our minds, voices that whisper doubts, that replay old wounds, that flatter us or shame us. We too face the danger of believing them, mistaking passing thoughts for truth. And we too can learn from Zuigan to pause, to call out to the awareness within, to remind ourselves of what is real. In the modern world, this might not look like speaking in a temple room. It might mean writing in a journal each morning, telling ourselves honestly what matters and what does not. It might mean standing before a mirror and asking, "Are you awake?" It might mean pausing in the rush of the day to say quietly, "Do not be deceived. The form may change, but the essence remains." The master we seek is the one who watches, who listens, who remains clear when all else shifts. Think of Zuigan when you face a decision clouded by fear. Think of him when you are praised and tempted to cling to the praise. Think of him when you are criticized and tempted to collapse into shame. In those moments, call out to yourself as he did, "Master, yes, be awake, yes." The strength of his story lies in its ordinariness. There were no miracles, no thunderclaps of enlightenment, no cosmic visions. There was only a man talking to himself at dawn. Yet in that simple act was the essence of Zen, awareness meeting itself, truth calling to truth. As the stories of Soyin Shaku, the old woman with the sticks, Kyogen in the snow, Ikkyu in the garden, and Shiono with her bucket have shown, awakening comes in many forms, sometimes in the crack of bamboo, sometimes in the fall of water, sometimes in the reflection of the moon. With Zuigan, it comes in the sound of his own voice, reminding us that awareness need not be sought in distant places. It is here, now, ready to answer, if we will only ask. And so, as this final story closes, picture the old monk standing at dawn, his robe thin against the coastal wind, his voice steady as he addresses the silence. Hear him say, "Master," hear the reply, "Yes." Let that dialogue echo within you, for in truth, it is not only Zuigan speaking, it is you, across oceans, mountains, gardens, and temples. These 6 stories have unfolded like lanterns lit one after another. Each flame has revealed a different face of the same truth. Awakening is not a distant treasure, but a presence available here and now. The question is not whether truth exists, but whether we are willing to notice it, to live in its light. We began with Soyin Shaku on the deck of a ship, a monk crossing the Pacific to bring Zen to the West. He showed us that discipline is not a rigid cage, but a gentle rhythm that holds life together. His words about the sky and the drifting clouds remind us that our worries are not permanent weights but passing forms. To live with such awareness is to step into each day lighter, freer, more ready to see clearly. Then we followed the elderly woman with her bundle of sticks to the Buddha. She challenged him, as many of us challenge life itself, asking how we can lay down insults and anger that feel too heavy to release. The Buddha's answer was simple. What you refuse to claim remains with its giver. The truth does not need our defense. It stands on its own. From her we learn that we need not carry what does not belong to us. The rope of resentment can be untied, and in that act we find a freedom deeper than revenge. From there we walked with Kyogen in the snow, circling endlessly in his search for his original face. His despair was broken open by the crack of bamboo, a sound that shattered illusion and revealed the truth already present. His story teaches that awakening often arrives not in answers forced by effort, but in the ordinary sounds and silences around us. It calls us to stop chasing and to start listening. We then stood with Ikkyu at a samurai's banquet, staring into a well where the moon's reflection shimmered and broke. He showed that our lives are often spent gazing into distorted waters, clinging to images of status, wealth, or approval. The moon itself remains untouched above, waiting for us to lift our eyes. His lesson is urgent for modern life. Stop mistaking reflection for reality. Look up, see what is whole. Next we carried water with Chiono, the young woman who sought enlightenment in humble tasks. When the bottom of her bucket broke and the reflection of the moon vanished, she discovered that truth was never in the vessel but in the sky above. Her awakening tells us that loss can be liberation, that when illusions shatter, what remains is not emptiness, but presence. We do not need to hold the light. We need only to live under it. Finally, we join Zuigan in his small room by the sea, calling to himself each morning, "Master, yes, be awake, yes." His daily dialogue reminds us that awareness must be tended every day. Illusion returns like dust, and we must sweep it again and again. His practice is not strange but profoundly practical. Speak to the awareness within, and let it answer. Taken together, these 6 stories form a circle, each echoing the others, each pointing back to the same truth. Soyen Shaku's discipline, the old woman's release, Kyogen's sudden clarity, Ikkyu's lifted gaze, Chiono's broken bucket, and Zuigan's dialogue are not separate teachings. They are facets of one jewel, each catching the light differently, but reflecting the same source. And what is that source? It is the awareness that underlies every moment of your life. It is the quiet presence that watches thoughts rise and fall, that notices anger yet does not become it, that hears the crack of bamboo, sees the reflection of the moon, and remains when vessels break. It is the master that Zuigan addressed each morning, the sky that Soyen Shaku looked to, the truth that the Buddha reminded the old woman of. The call now is not simply to admire these stories, but to live them. They are not meant to remain on temple walls or in books of history. They are meant for you, tonight and tomorrow. When worries gather like clouds, remember Soyen Shaku. Step outside, breathe, and look at the sky. Let the worries drift. They are not you. When anger or insult clings to your heart, remember the old woman with her sticks. Untie the rope. Let the bundle fall. Do not carry what is not yours. When you feel trapped in endless circles of thought, remember Kyogen in the snow. Stop forcing the answer. Listen. The sound you need may be as near as the next moment of silence. When you find yourself staring into distorted reflections, chasing approval, or fearing rejection, remember Ikkyu by the well. Lift your eyes. The moon above is unbroken, and so are you. When loss strikes and the bottom falls out of what you relied on, remember Chiono and her bucket. Let the water spill. The moon was never inside. What you truly are cannot be taken. And when each new morning arrives, remember Tsuigan. Speak honestly to yourself. Ask if you are awake. Answer with truth. Do not be deceived. Do not deceive yourself. These are not distant teachings. They are daily practices. They are choices you can make in ordinary moment, in the kitchen, in the office, on a crowded street, or alone in your room at night. They do not require temples or robes. They require only attention, honesty, and the willingness to live with clarity. So as this journey of stories draws to a close, let it be the beginning of another journey, your own. Carry these images with you as lanterns. The ship at sea, the bundle of sticks, the snow and bamboo, the moon in the well, the broken bucket, the voice at dawn. Each one is a reminder, a hand pointing back to the truth within you. Do not wait for perfect conditions. Do not wait for someone else to declare you ready. The practice begins where you stand. The awareness is already here. The invitation has already been given. Lift your eyes. Lay down your burdens. Listen to the sound of the present. Stop chasing reflections. Let illusion break. Speak truth to yourself. And in doing so, discover what these masters discovered. That peace is not something to be achieved, but something to be recognized. The lantern has been passed from their hands to yours. Now it is yours to carry into the world, to light your path, and perhaps to light the path for others. Step forward, awake,